Hey everybody, welcome back to The Way of Ramen. Today we are making a bowl of Chuka Soba, the original OG style of ramen. The name itself is kind of confusing because soba usually refers to buckwheat noodles, but Chuka Soba actually means Chinese soba because the Japanese had never eaten anything like this before and didn't know what to call it. I'm loosely following a recipe from a Japanese ramen book, and some of the methods were kind of counterintuitive to what I usually try to do, but I tried to stick with the recipe the best that I could and see how it turned out. The results are pretty good, so I guess there was some method to the madness. Alright, let's get right into this one. To start things off, I got about 1.6 kilograms of pork bones into a pot and added about 2.4 liters of water. The first weird thing about this recipe is there's no pre-boil. You start off with high heat, let the pot come almost to a boil, then right before it starts to boil, you just turn down the heat and keep it at a bare simmer for about 8 hours, or up to 8 hours. When a lot of the scum starts to stick together, you can skim it off, then continue with the bare simmer for the remaining time, making sure not to let the pot come to a boil. While the main soup is going, you can get some water into a separate pot and add some pork belly or some pork shoulder to make some chashu. You're going to skim off any scum that floats up and then just boil it for about an hour or so, or until the pork is soft. Once the pork is done, you can remove it from the liquid, and then we're going to take this boiling liquid and we're going to use about maybe 900 milliliters of it and add it to the main soup. And as it's going, you're going to want to keep skimming off any of the scum that comes up. You want to keep this thing as clean as possible. Next, we're going to make a niboshi aroma oil. I weighed out about 6 grams each, about 2 types of niboshi. I actually couldn't get the ones that were listed in the recipe, so you can just use whatever you got on hand too, just like I did. For the oil or fat component of this, the original recipe called for 100% lard, but I decided to cut the lard in half and use half grapeseed oil. So you're gonna get 200 milliliters combined total of fat and oil. You're gonna heat the oil on medium heat and then add your niboshi. And once small bubbles start to appear, you're going to lower the heat and then let the niboshi fry until they just start to get a little bit of color on them. This is kind of weird because usually when you do a niboshi oil, you're going low and slow, but I'm following this recipe here. So once you feel like you got the flavor that you wanted, you can add a pinch of katsuobushi, then immediately strain your oil. I went a little too long and my oil came out a little bit dark, but it still tasted great, so it was okay. So after about 6 hours of simmering, you're going to add some aromatics to the pork chintan stock. I cut 3 large cloves of garlic in half and sliced about 12.5 grams of ginger, and I also added 1 green onion with the white part removed. Add that to the stock and then let it go for the last 2 hours, still keeping it at a bare simmer. And once your soup is done, you're going to strain it out into another pot. The downside of not doing the pre-boil is there was a ton of scum in the pot like I expected at the end. And so as I was straining it, I was seriously worried that this was not going to be okay. I ended up leaving a small bit of soup in the big pot because there was just so much scum at the bottom. And the soup didn't look very clear, but I cooled it down anyway and stored it in the fridge overnight, and I was going to check it out the next day. The last thing for the first day was to prep a niboshi dashi for the next day. I didn't have the right niboshi again, so I just used whatever I had on hand. I'll leave the quantities and the right ingredients in the description. I soaked the niboshi in a pot that was way too small in about 1.5 liters of water overnight. The next morning, I transferred it to a bigger pot and spilled a lot everywhere. And then I got that pot onto the stove and turned it up to high heat. Once a small white bubbles start to form at the top, you want to keep an eye on it because right before it starts to boil, you want to just strain it out, and that is your first dashi or your ichiban dashi. Now if you want, you can add the niboshi and some water back into the pot again, and then let it simmer for 5 minutes, and then strain that out into a separate container. This is called a second dashi or a niban dashi, and it has a lighter color and flavor, which could be better for people who don't really care for fish. So here you can see the two dashis, the first dashi and the second dashi. The recipe calls for the first dashi, the darker one, and the stronger one, but you can use the second one too if you don't really like fish. So next I got the soup out from the fridge, the pork chintan, and I skimmed off any of that fat that had congealed at the top. You don't want any of that fat in the final soup because it's just going to make the soup cloudy. And at this stage, you want to mix your pork chintan stock with your niboshi dashi into another pot that you use for the final soup. The ratio is up to you, but if you don't really care for fish, you can go lighter on the niboshi dashi. I personally went for a 1-to-1 mix and about 300 milliliters total. You're going to heat that up and then get the rest of your ingredients for ramen started. For toppings, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I got some chashu here that I defrosted. I'm just going to slice this and heat it up in the toaster oven. I have the recipe for this on the channel, but I'll link it up in the top right and in the description below. I'm going to use both the white and the green part of a green onion for the toppings here, just to give the bowl a little bit of contrasting color. I found some homemade noodles in the freezer, so I'm just going to cook this for about 1.5 minutes. And while the noodles are cooking, I'm going to drop about 30 milliliters of tare, about 2 tablespoons, into a heated bowl along with 15 milliliters of niboshi oil and my heated up double soup. You're going to strain your noodles really well. You don't want any of this extra water going into the soup to dilute it. And then you're going to add them to your bowl. You're going to give them a nice fold to create a platform for your toppings. And then top it with your heated up chashu and the white and green part of the green onion, as well as a piece of nori. And that, my friends, is a bowl of Chuka Soba, the original style of ramen. This is my first time trying to use just pork bones in a chintan. It tasted good, but I think I still prefer a little bit of chicken in there. I was a little bit worried that the soup was going to taste a little bit fishy because I had a niboshi dashi as well as the niboshi oil in it, but it wasn't at all. It tasted really balanced and it tasted great. The weakest part of the bowl by far was the noodles. I don't know when I made these things, but the soup deserved a lot better. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching and for all the love and support. I really do appreciate it. If you guys want to see me make anything in particular on this channel, like any type of ramen or something, just leave it in the comments below, and if I can do it or if I can find a recipe for it, I'll definitely give it a shot. Thank you guys all so much again, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!